I'm trying to clap along, but I'm always out of tune. Anyway, hey, welcome again with the at the user offers hours today. My name is Brian Vermeer, and you see that below on your screen. But today I do not have Matt Jarvis with me. I have two other folks with me. But before that, today we're gonna talk about the VS Code plugin. I hope you know VS Code, Visual Studio Code. I'm a Java developer. Probably don't know much about it. That's not completely true, but we'll look into that. But not alone. I'm here with my fellow colleagues like Brian Clark. Welcome, Brian. How are you?
I'm stunned.
You're stunned.
I'm
Why? Why?
stunned.
Why is that?
I don't know. I'm happy to be here, happy to be a guest, and I'm just like frozen in time, man. This is wild.
Nice, nice. But you're not the only star on the show today. We've got
Oh,
us our second
nice.
star, and is Mr. Micah Silverman. Good
Music was
morning,
so
Micah.
peppy, I couldn't help but bop around to it. Nobody wants to see that.
Oh, we can do it again if you want.
Yes, let's do it.
Let's do it. All right.
Bum, 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 ba-dum, bum, 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 bum.
We're
It's
almost
so
in. We're,
peppy.
we're almost in tune. That's good.
Yeah.
All right. Again, welcome to the next version, the new version of the user office hours. We're now in yellow. We've been doing that for I think the last couple of ones. Before that, we were all in purple, but I love the yellow one. However, this is the user office hours about the VS Code plugin. But if you have any questions about anything that is Snyk related or well, maybe even personal, like what kind of hat am I wearing? Or is Brian wearing, or whatever. You can ask anything you like. We're probably not answer all your questions, the personal ones. I mean, however, if you have any questions around Snyk, feel free to ask them anytime, and we'll try to answer them. Well, in the best capabilities we have, or we come back to you with answers later on. But today we are starting with the VS Code plugin. And Brian, first for you, the first question is: VS Code your preferred IDE?
Short answer, final answer, yes. But before we go further, you mentioned at the beginning of this, and I just really want to call this out. And I know I'm going to put them on the spot right now, but you mentioned Matt Jarvis is not here, but I heard to help make up for that, Micah has a really good British accent that he's going to talk in throughout the rest of the live stream for us, so that we still have that same feel of the user office hours with you and Matt. So Micah, take it
No,
away.
you're right. The only problem is I have this AI audio filter that automatically converts it back to an American accent. So like I can't even get around that. I'm speaking in a British accent right now, but the filter's, smoothing it out.
Wow, that's really advanced AI right there.
Yeah.
Technology. Again, technology is holding you back.
So back to the
Anyway,
question, VS
yep.
Code, yes, it is my jam. I've built extensions for it myself. I use it anytime I'm coding for the most part, and have been doing so for many, many moons now.
And why is that? Why is VS Code your preferred IDE? If I can even call it IDE.
Well, that's the thing. Like
Shots fired.
that's the beauty
Oh,
of VS Code is you can make it what you want it to be. You can make it feel more like a full-blown IDE interactive development environment, or you can make it a very simplified, dumbed down, not dumbed. I don't know if that's a great way to put it, but you know what I'm saying, like a simplified editor that has a little bit of rich features to it, kind of like Notepad++, if you will. So
I think that's already a great question. What is an IDE? Well, as far as I know, is IDE stands for Intelligent Development Environment, or do we have any other responses to what the acronym stands for?
my understanding is it's interactive development environment.
Oh, interactive could be as well. Integrated. Some Kyle
Integrated.
says, but it's literally a well, I would say normally a Swiss Army knife for developers to do a lot of things in one screen.
Yes.
So hope that answers your question, Robert. What I see now that in that Visual Studio Code is quite a small and lightweight thing to use, and I use it every now and then. But yeah, as probably most of the folks know, it's that I'm a Java developer and I use more the heavyweight, old school, IntelliJ kind of stuff. We'll probably come to that as well. What is your preferred IDE, Mike?
Well, my preferred IDE is IntelliJ from JetBrains. Huzzah! A nice, lightweight, interactive development environment or integrated development environment. He said sarcastically. It is not lightweight, but it is great. I will say that probably third runner-up now is, for me anyway, is still Vim. I still use Vim a lot, but probably first would be IntelliJ, then VS Code, then Vim.
So we can say that VS Code by default is an editor, and you can make it as smart as possible. So that means that if you're called Brian Clark, you don't need all that smartness. You're doing that smartness yourself, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Let's get right to it. I know you already shared your screen, and well, let's show what you have on that. Let's see.
Well, I feel teamed up on here. I got two IntelliJ IDEA developers, like.
Hey, maybe we can learn a thing or two. I mean, even nowadays, Java people are using Visual Studio Code, specifically the folks from Red Hat, because they created the Java plugin for Visual Studio Code.
And there you go. That's perfect segue into what we were talking about before with VS Code, is that you can make it as rich of a development environment as you wish. So, and you can use it for all different types of programming languages. I mean, it's predominantly was built for web development using web technologies, for more like the front end, JavaScript, HTML, CSS. So those are like, you can definitely get the feel that those are the first class citizens when it comes to using VS Code. But you can then install additional plugins for support and the rich text editing features that you would get natively for those languages, but for other languages. So C#, Java, Go, Rust, you name it, there's pretty much a plugin for it. Extensibility is at the core of VS Code, which is a blessing and a curse sometimes too, because going to what you both were talking about in terms of like, it's funny how we describe our tools as like lightweight or heavy, like as if they're like, the personification of them, almost like they have like a physicality to them, but they don't. It just feels that way. But the reason I say the extensions can be a blessing as a curse is because you can kind of go a little overboard installing so many extensions that maybe you don't use day to day, and it becomes more bloated, or it can become more bloated depending on the architecture of those extensions and so forth. I can talk about VS Code for days, Brian. So please keep me in check, cut me off, and whatnot with this. So
no, I think it's quite interesting because I use VS Code as an editor, mainly to edit some JavaScript stuff if I need to. I'm not good at it at all, but what you see is that the memory footprint for Visual Studio Code is way smaller than for a lot of other IDEs. So it spins up easier if I just need to change some YAML files or some XML files or some JSON files or whatever. It's easier to spin up, and it's richer for me than just Atom or some of the other Notepad kind of environments. So that's why I do like it. I did some development for Visual Studio Code in the past, but I'm glad that we have a pro in here that uses this all the time instead of every now and then. So good to have you here.
Happy to be here. So speaking of the extensions, and today's focus area is working on how can you get some help in making sure that you build applications securely while using VS Code as your tool of choice in this case. And it leads right into
had to put it this one. I'm convinced that if a person claims they are good at JavaScript, they are either lying or confused with Java. Thank you, Robert. I appreciate this so much.
Yeah. I don't know that I know anybody that claims that they're good at JavaScript, which is I think it fits. Yeah, that checks out. So yeah, extensions. That's where things come into play to help you build applications more securely. And one in particular, of course, is one that we have from Snyk. Snyk Security Code and Open Source Dependency. Well, I don't know why the name is the title of this is so big, but if you're familiar with VS Code and installing extensions, you're going to go to the extension view. Now, things may look a little bit different on my screen than yours based on theming and the way you lay things out. I like having the activity bar on the right-hand side. This bar is the activity bar, by the way. This is the sidebar view in here. And then this is the editor view over here, by the way. So I'm going to call these things out that are the terms specific, or at least that I've come to know within VS Code so people can follow along pretty quickly. So the extensions view, you go to that, you search for Snyk, and then you click on this first one, the Snyk Security extension. And you're going to install that. It may prompt you to reload VS Code, maybe not. It might just work right in place depending on the version of VS Code you have and so forth. It might have some implications with that. But you can read more about it, but we're going to show you. I don't like reading. Reading's not my my forte. So yeah, there's the link. Thank you for dropping the link there. I meant to put it in the chat too. There we go.
Yeah, we'll put it in the chat.
I got you.
Oh, you already got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
So then once you have it installed, you have your app open. I'm using our Node.js Goof project here. And then, so that'll allow me, like, I'm going about my business, developing, writing code and so forth. And what I'm going to start noticing with the extension installed is things, and it might just take a moment here, are going to start having the typical squigglies that we've come to know as developers with pretty much any development environment, right? Or tooling. You're going to see those squigglies that indicate some issues that you might want to focus on or address. So in this case, I'm getting this one right here, which is telling me some security information from Snyk Code Security specifically, which is one of our products that we offer at Snyk. That's telling me to avoid hard coding values that are meant to be secret. Found a hard coded string used in here. So as an example here, maybe you were prototyping something and then you're starting to move more towards production, and you hard coded it just to save some time to test things out, make sure it's working. You don't want to check it in like that for one. Or two, maybe you did check it in like this, you want to rotate it and then start using things like, actually, I think it even gives you suggestions, right? So let's take a look at that one more time. If we view the problem, it's not giving me the suggestions here. It's just telling me that this is something I should avoid doing. But to give people a suggestion for this specific issue, you'd want to use something like environment variables or some type of key store that you would access separately, like a vault, to gather those sensitive information that you need to use within your application. Do we have any questions so far? Right? You love me some squigglies, says Kyle in the chat. I love me some squigglies too.
Yeah, no particular questions around this. I love that it's well, it's in your face, but still not too much.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
It doesn't scream at you, so I think that's good. That direct feedback.
I feel like it's always screaming at me, to be honest, but that's just me. Anytime, because I'm the type of person, I don't know about you both, Micah and Brian, but whenever I get the notifications, like the little red bubbles or anything like that, I have to clear them out. It has to be clean and like neat. And, so this always feels like it's yelling at me anyway. So
we got a question here. This VS extension, does it requires a license?
No, it is completely free for you to use. You install it, start going right away. You need to, well, I guess I jumped ahead a little bit, right? I wanted to show the functionality that you get to give you an idea of why you might want to use the Snyk extension, but maybe we should take a step back. That's a great question. Thank you, Hellraiser. And talk about how to get set up, right? So I'm already set up right now. Once I installed it, I already have my personal, I think I have my personal Snyk on this computer, my personal Snyk account hooked up to the Snyk extension here. So what it's using behind the scenes is the Snyk CLI, and then using that to kind of help provide this rich experience to notify me of security issues that it's detecting. So once you have it installed, you'll see that you have the little Snyk dog icon, patch icon right there in the activity bar, which will bring up this view where you can get an idea of some of the things that it's possible of detecting and showing you within your project. So one is, I have them minimized right now so that we don't get too distracted with much noise right now. but you can look at your open source dependencies. So that's using Snyk open source product, which is helping you learn more about what vulnerabilities are found in your dependencies and your indirect dependencies or transitive dependencies for your application. So in this case, I'm using Node and NPM. So any NPM packages I depend upon, if there's known vulnerabilities in the versions that I'm relying upon to run in my application, it will let me know through Snyk open source. Then there's Snyk code, which you need to turn on and opt into using because of probably where maybe Hellraiser might be thinking is licensing and stuff like that you might want to do when it comes to Snyk code. But what Snyk code is for and about is what we're seeing here right off the bat that I demonstrated. It's analyzing my actual code and letting me know of known vulnerability or known possible vulnerabilities based on misconfigurations, you know, mishandling of user input. It shows the whole data flow from in to out basically throughout the application, and lets me know of possible security issues that could arise based on how I might have written my code. And then there's, as an added bonus, I view at least, is the code quality. So maybe like just best practices and things like that gets categorized in a separate section within this view, this collapsible view, if you will. I'm going to pause there just for a moment, make sure we're good here. So in that sense, it doesn't really require a license, Hellraiser, but you do need to have a Snyk account, and then you connect that. And the way you get prompted to connect that, if I recall correctly, you'd say Snyk login, which will take you through a flow like an OAuth redirect type of flow, where it will prompt open your browser. I'm not going to go through it right now because I don't want to, expose any sensitive data on my own account right now. But it'll prompt open your browser, ask you to sign into your Snyk account, and then you click like authorize, and then it'll redirect you back to VS Code and say that you're all set to go, kind of thing.
Yeah, so you don't need a license for it. You just, like, the free Snyk account is more than sufficient to do these kind of scans, right?
Yes, absolutely.
We got another question over here, and this is an interesting one. Maybe I'm not sure if we want to pick this one up now. Why does Snyk? You mistyped it, Gregorian Wolf. It is not sync. It's Snyk. I understand though. The CLI always downloads everything every time you open it. That is a very good question, and I have a guess why, but maybe some of the other folks know.
I have a question for the question. What are we saying in this case? What's the context for down? What is everything in this case?
That's a very, very good question. Maybe our Gregorian Wolf can clarify that.
I'm going to make an assumption because it's feedback I had for the team as well, and that is that usually, like, it just happened actually right before we started streaming. There was an update to the Snyk extension in VS Code, and I said, okay, go ahead and update it, and it made me reload VS Code and everything, and then it was all up to date. But then it quickly prompted with a little notification in the bottom right hand corner over here, saying that it's downloading the Snyk CLI, and I think that's I'm assuming, but Gregorian, keep me honest here if this is correct. I'm assuming that's what you're talking about. And my understanding in talking with the team internally is that usually it's every 4 days, like they break it out, because the Snyk CLI does update quite often, is my understanding. And but instead of always updating it in the VS Code extension, they wait like every 4 days or so, I think. But I don't know why it necessarily needs to prompt us for that. So that is feedback that I've shared with them, but this is good to hear folks in the community that are noticing this as well.
I see that Gregorian Wolf clarified everything is every time. So every time he launches VS Code, I guess it re-downloads the CLI. That's what we're talking about. And I guess that's for about every 4 days or so, you're saying, Brian?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, the reason for that is that the CLI that is used underneath that, but basically that is the one binary that rules them all. That has a lot of simplified knowledge, or a lot of knowledge in that, like what is your ecosystem, what do we scan, if you have multiple ecosystems, how do we pick up the manifest file if we're talking about open source security, and basically every day there are multiple releases of the CLI. So that's why they put in, I guess, a timer of every 4 days depending on your settings, I believe you can nowadays set a few things if you want that every time or not. And if not, then we probably need to get that back to the team. But the main reason is we see that the CLI that is encapsulated within VS Code for this plugin is always the newest CLI, because if things get fixed in the CLI layer, it will get downloaded regardless of if you have another CLI running on your local machine. So we know that the output is as valid as possible. That is the reason why. If it does it every time, I wasn't aware that it was every time, so we might need to look into that. Thanks for that feedback.
It does feel that way. So, like, again, I don't know that it's necessary. Like, from my experience, I don't know that I feel it's been every time, but it feels like it's very often. And then I went, and once I got that feedback from the team internally that it's every 4 days, I went and tested it out, and I was like, okay, yeah, it is every 4 days. Like, I left VS Code open intentionally, and then waited to close it and reopen it each day, and then I saw that it was on like the 4th day is when I got the notification for it. But I think to help cut down on that in terms of like overall feedback is there doesn't necessarily need to be a note, like a little toast notification that pops up, like one of the ones that show up as part. Right now it says no new notifications for me, but like I don't need to see a notification necessarily that the CLI is being updated. Like that could just happen in the background in my opinion, and I don't mind that. Like I'd rather that than see the notification that's showing the progress of it, right? Just never close VS Code, obviously. Kappa. Yeah.
I think that is the only correct answer you can give currently.
There you go. Yeah. I don't want to skim over this, but I like Frackberg's comment from earlier about, can I just download this to have the cool logo on my sidebar? Yeah.
Yes,
I love
you
the
can.
logo.
Yeah. One thing while we're talking about settings that I have found useful that others may as well is there's a checkbox for running Snyk open source security in automatically, and that's super handy. But I do toggle it off sometimes if I have a particularly big project, so that this way I can run it when I want to run it and not just have it automatically run. So there's actually a ton of settings in here that are super handy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I see I have mine unchecked as well. I think similar reasons as you there, Micah. Then there's also advanced mode that you can do lots of. So if you want to get to this, folks, Control comma or Command comma is the keyboard shortcut, and then I just search in the search bar at the top of the settings here. I search for Snyk, and then I could see all the Snyk related options and settings that I have available to me through the extension. So if I wanted to pass specific parameters to the CLI regarding my open source security tests, turn on advanced mode, which allows me to run automatically manually or every 30 minutes for Snyk code. Default is automatically, the one that Micah just talked about, and then some other things that I don't even know.
That these custom API endpoints is if you run a on-prem version of Snyk open source, for instance.
Ooh, okay.
So it connects to either a proxy or a different version of Snyk, which is not your typical SaaS solution.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha. Here's one that I remember bringing up with the team too, where we were originally storing the token. Like, so when you log in, they need to get when you log in through the extension to your Snyk account, and they need to get an API token to interact with and use and know what projects are hooked up to your Snyk account to be scanned for open source and whatever other products you might be using with Snyk. They need that token somewhere in the VS Code extension to use as part of it, right? And originally they were just storing it as plain text in here, but we got it updated now to where it uses, which is also like, in all fairness, the way VS Code used to work, it didn't have a secure storage right away. You actually had to use a third party. If you were even thinking about this, you had to use a third party like library to pull into your extensions to use the operating system's secure storage to hide sensitive information like this on the machine. So, but it's good to see that VS Code has come along to offer this to extension authors, and that the Snyk extension is using this as well. So I mean, we could probably go through more settings. Where do we want to go from here, friends?
Let's look into how open source security is displayed to you as a user. I mean,
Okay.
there are some pretty nice features there.
Yeah. So I'm going to make this a bit bigger so we can see. And so in the open source security collapsible panel, again, within the view of the Snyk extension from the sidebar there, you open this up. I think it's open by default. And then it looks at your package lock JSON to identify all your dependencies and their transitive dependencies that might have vulnerabilities in them. Now, this one, it's showing a lot. There's 95, and that's because this project is intentionally vulnerable for demonstration purposes. But your mileage may vary. Maybe you'll have less. Maybe you'll have more. I don't know. I hope it's not more. But the idea is you can now, without having to go into your browser through your Snyk account, without having to go through the CLI and view this yourself, you can stay within the context of where you're editing as a developer, which to me is a huge plus. I don't like the context switching, even though it's like milliseconds. That context switching can be costly, time wise, and just cognitively. So now I can start browsing. All right, I can see what vulnerabilities and their severity levels. So there's the C is indicating those are critical. Then there's high, and then scrolling down. It's sorted in that order, medium, and then all the way down to low, right? And so I can start browsing and see and understand what are the vulnerabilities that are in this project here. And let's make this a bit bigger. And when I click on one, it gives me more details. It gives me the write-up that you might see when you're going through Snyk's UI on the web, that gives you details on this particular vulnerability. So in this case, we have a vulnerability in this handlebars module. I think this is one that's more directly, no, it's indirect, right? So it shows me it's introduced through Goof is the name of the project. I have this direct dependency of HBS, and it's depending upon handlebars, which is the vulnerable module, right? So I get to see that information. I get to see right away how to remediate this problem, like this vulnerability. I need to upgrade to 4.1.0 of this direct dependency, which will pull in the patch version of this handlebars library that I'm indirectly depending upon. I can find out more about the exact vulnerability within this package that's found here. So in this case, it's a prototype pollution. English is my first language, and I still fumble on it, even without a British accent. Prototype pollution is a vulnerability affecting JavaScript, right? So then I can learn more as a developer. Maybe you are kind of curious, you're security curious, and you want to learn more about these things and understand it better so you know what you're defending against, right? Well, Snyk gives you that information directly in this vulnerability report right here so that you can understand it better and why it's important to, not have prototype pollution vulnerabilities in your code. What else? We can.
I think can you open the, and I'm not sure if that still works. There was a feature that we created some time ago. If you go to the package.json file, just open that file.
Package.json file?
If you just open the package.json file and you wait for a minute, and you see in the dependencies that right away that you get that in your inline, like, hey, this package has 2 vulnerabilities or brings in 5 vulnerabilities. So while you are coding or while you are inspecting your package.json, it gets basically, well, in your face, but not too much again, but shows you right away what the possible problems are. And I'm pretty sure that if you go into one of the JS files, like you've got app.js somewhere on your right-hand side, it might work. Yeah, you see, it might work here as well. So you require a certain library, and then it gives you inline what the amount of vulnerabilities are, and if you want to solve them, yes or no, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you bring that up, because maybe you're not, as a developer, you might not intentionally be opening up the extension and using this view to analyze it, right? You're in your code, you're in app.js, you're in your package JSON. And so it notifies you there, which is probably the most likely spot you're going to be alerted to this more so while you're in that development mode, right? So
why should developers care? What's the worst that could happen? Well, Kyle, are you sure you want to know this? No, of course. I think as developers, we should care about this because we create the solutions for any problem we want to tackle in our application. So normally you probably work in a team or something like that, and you have some autonomy. But to make sure that if you create something and you get right away feedback that you're doing something wrong, that helps you prevent it before it hits your repository. But that's my small opinion on it. But I know that Kyle is trolling me.
Yeah. Which is right up Micah's alley, right, Micah?
That is correct. I was calling Kyle a troll in appreciation, not as a derogatory.
Yeah. So
What
in terms of why we should care, I think you hit it spot on. I mean, it's important for us as developers to be aware of these things. I mean, I know a lot of us can get caught up in we got to deliver features, functionality to the end users, the business, your customers, but at the same time, you don't want to abuse that trust that they give to you to make sure that you're handling all their information, data, and whatnot in those services and products that you're offering to them safely, right? So.
Going to this question, with Snyk OSS, does it show your exposure if you're using that vulnerable part of the library? That's a very, very good question. I guess not, as in there doesn't have to be a direct connection from any, well, let's say any endpoint or any user input to that package specifically. But that's also the problem, because are you sure it's not used at all? So I think, and this now from the top of my head, with Snyk open source, by default we do not use code inspection to look into if that vulnerable part is actually used or not, if there is a direct connection. We can do that, but I'm not sure that's part of the VS Code plugin. That's more of the stuff that we can do in the UI, but I'm not sure if that works for every language, to be honest. So my safest answer would be no. We're just showing you that there are vulnerabilities that might be happening, and it can be that you're not directly hitting these ones.
Yeah. I would guess it'd probably be something in conjunction with Snyk code that you would need to enable to help provide that visibility, right?
Yeah, it can be done, but that we need to connect to, and we need to make cross references in that. And that is currently not happening in this plugin, as far as I know. But Micah, for you, a question from my side. What do you think of that inline feedback, like one vulnerability? Is that too much in your face, or is that actually quite useful?
I find it pretty useful, although I must say I don't see that in my version of Visual Studio Code with the Snyk plugin, and I wonder why not. I wonder if I have something configured or misconfigured. What I do see is advisor scores, but I know that that's an experimental feature that I enabled. So maybe we can put a pin in that and come back to it because it's pretty cool. Oh, inlay hints enabled. Where is that?
Do you happen to have that turned off?
Let's see. Maybe I do. Inlay hints. Is that what I want to search for?
Yes.
No, it says on.
It says on.
So it might be interesting. I wonder why that would be.
What about this other one? Just search for a hint in general.
Right. Searching. Maybe I can share my screen and you can show me. Yeah, I have text also.
You have text as well.
Let's see.
Those would be my two
this
guesses.
this may be something that other people might run up against.
Yeah.
Potentially. So one thing that I explicitly enabled was this advisor score, which we can come back to. And I don't know if that would turn off the other things, but in this,
I think so. It can be.
So maybe that turned that off. Okay.
If you turn the advisor scores off, that might be that it works, because if it uses the same code, it might be that it overwrites that inline message with the next message.
Yeah, and
Mm.
it is a preview feature for anybody that's interested in the extension settings. You can click on these preview features, and then it brings you over to the settings.json. And I turned on advisor to true. Let me get rid of that. Oh, and I wonder if there's anything else here that I futzed around with. I'm going to say for the sake of argument, this is probably something I broke in messing around with things. I probably have to relaunch it. Sorry for the infinite scroll there. Huh. Interesting, right? Now it's all gone. One other thing I noticed
It might be loading up still there.
Might be
Oh,
might
that's
be
good.
loading up a few things.
Yeah, and by the way, it does find the issues that I expected to find. This is a mixed JavaScript and Java application. It's a multi-module Maven project, and the Snyk plugin still finds everything. It finds the POM XML, it finds package, but I do notice that it's finding package lock JSON instead of package JSON.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that maybe is an indicator. I wonder if I were to open up package lock JSON, if I would get the inline stuff there.
No, you won't.
No. Okay. So yeah, I don't know exactly what that is, but maybe we can.
Well, I can tell you a little background on the inline stuff, because we first, and you probably see it if you go back to what Brian Clark first did when you looked for the plugin. You saw 3 plugins. One was the Snyk plugin, the official one that we're showcasing today. You saw the preview plugin, which is basically the beta version of what's coming up. And you saw a third one, which was called Vulncast. And Vulncast was was the predecessor of this thing. Before there was anything there, we started an open source initiative specifically for Snyk open source to do this, and that's why where the inline stuff came in. That was an idea we came up with. I think it was based on the plugin from, I think Wix created the package cost plugin, which basically says if you want to introduce a package, how much space does it cost, and we created that for vulnerabilities, and we had that same inline interface that they're using. We basically we borrowed that idea to do that with vulnerabilities. So this was not Snyk branded at that point, and then they used this in the Snyk plugin to combine open source security and Snyk code, and well, apparently they probably want to do containers and in that later on if it's not already there. So that's a bit of the background story around that, and it was first only created for the JavaScript files that we have that inline when you require or you actually call a certain package. And then we did the same for the package.json, because that's the thing you might edit. The package lock is more or less always generated. Am I correct? So yeah,
yes.
that is the reason why we did do it in your package.json. If you do that manually, you might be able to change that while you were typing.
Neat.
Fun thing is, if you do HTML and you connect to a package on a CDN, it also flags that in your HTML file.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, so I'm glad you bring that up, because that was one of the other things that I think makes the Snyk extension stand out, besides the awesome features that we're kind of going through, is that I don't know of any other tool right now. We've had this question come up even in some of our customer meetings and stranger dangers, where they're like, hey, what about when we load up through CDN some JavaScript code that we rely upon, maybe libraries there? How do we detect that? And right now, as far as I know, the only way to do that is through the Snyk extension in VS Code that will alert me to that. So I don't know if I have an example here, but we can make one real quick where, I don't know, what's maybe like a vulnerable version of Lodash I can hook up into an index.html file. Let's try it out live on stream, right? What could go wrong?
Yeah.
Let's put your screen. Let's put your screen
Tempt
up.
the demo monster.
And
Let's-
got it. You all see my screen? I took the window away, so okay, cool.
Yeah, I see your screen.
Yeah, so sometimes you might load it in here like scripts, and then the source equals something. And let's go like, I don't know. Let me see if I can find Lodash CDN. I'm just gonna search on another screen here. JS deliver or CDN JS Lodash. And what version do we want that's vulnerable? We want version 4.17.4. I'm gonna grab that one and get a link to that and paste that in this source here. And then you can see, look, it's already showing me that inlay hint. Where'd it go? Oh, it disappeared. But it was there very briefly. It said fetching vulnerabilities. Maybe this one doesn't have the vulnerabilities. Where'd it go? 4.17.4. 4.17.4. Oh, there it is again. And then it went away.
Then it went. Okay, I'm not sure why.
I'm not sure why that is, but I've seen it. This is me tempting the demo gods, right? That's why, probably. But I've seen it where it will alert me like, hey, this version you're using is just like the inlay hints that we see in the package JSON. It lets me know that this is vulnerable as well, and that's right now, as far as I know, unless you guys know of other possible solutions that are out there to help with that. It's the only one that I know of that will alert of vulnerabilities in versions of packages or libraries that you're referencing via script tags and CDNs like this.
Maybe it's because it's the Lodash minified version. Maybe that is the thing. I'm not sure, but it shouldn't be.
That should matter. Maybe let's try another package like Moment 2.15. Let's see. Moment.js. That. And version 2. Where is it? 15.1. And let's try that in there instead. Showing it here, hidden off screen. If I reload VS Code. Actually, quick tip for you, Micah. I know you were reloading VS Code by like hitting the menu options. You can bind that to a keyboard shortcut.
Neat.
So yeah, the command palette is your friend. So Control Shift P or Command Shift P on a Mac, and then reload. You reload window, and then you can assign a key binding for that. So for me, I added my own Control R to do that, to reload the window.
Neat.
Makes it a little bit quicker and easier.
In the
So you're used to doing that in the browser, right?
Sure.
In the meantime, I want to briefly comment on this thing. It was like going on to that. If you're not using that package, is it do we match that vulnerable? And then Hellraiser says many didn't use log4j bits, yet it was by default set to vulnerable. I think we also have to include there that Java is a different ecosystem than JavaScript and how things work. In Java, you can only have one package of one version available on the class path. So that means that if log4j is loaded for version 2.14, and some other package wants to use another version, the first package will get loaded into class path depending on how it's configured. But it can only be one, and it will be shared upon all your other dependencies and usage. So I'm not sure if I'm informed correctly. Brian, you can give the best answer on that. You can have multiple versions of a dependency in a JavaScript application, right?
Yes.
Because it's more sandboxed into, if I have a transitive dependency for Lodash 4.17, another one can have a transitive dependency for 4.18. That is possible, correct?
Yes, that's possible. To be honest, I'm not very, very knowledgeable in the whole way that NPM and some of the other packages, well, NPM in particular, let's say, like has a certain approach to handling such situations of when you like one of your dependencies depends on like you said, Lodash certain version, another one depends on Lodash another version. And depending on how those are set, like if it's hard set to a version or it's a little bit flexible in terms of like the minor version, and so it does some calculations there to figure out which version is best to support both if possible. Otherwise, it gets multiple versions there. But again, I'm not an expert in that stuff. But yeah, that's why you want to keep track of both versions in there and be alerted to that because of that possibility. And then there's other package managers that take a different approach in handling such situations like that. I don't know, I was fumbling on my words there too.
No worries, no worries. What Kyle said, I think that question was around vulnerability. Just to be clear, if we're talking Log4j, we're talking Java. That means that with things like reflectively used code or serializability, things that are available in the class path can be loaded into memory, even if there's no direct connection from, for instance, an endpoint to that library. It is possible with things like expression languages in Spring or some other frameworks to load these classes into memory and actually use them in an attack chain. So that Log4j is a bit of a different thing, and it works in different ways in different ecosystem. And we have to be careful not to compare these. Well, basically, you're comparing apples and oranges in many cases over there. Just saying.
I'm trying to figure out why. So I went to the non-minified version of Moment as an example, and maybe because I'm not using it, it's making a liar out of me right now. But I've seen it work where it shows you.
I know it worked before because I was on that team creating the first version, so I know you're not lying. And, but let's find out why it didn't work. Maybe we screwed things up for this demo, or we said something wrong, or it basically is broken for some reason. I don't know. Can be.
Yeah, maybe. But there you have it. Brian supporting Brian's.
That's how we do. That's how we roll.
All right, cool. So yeah, there's many different avenues in which the Snyk extension will notify you and alert you to possible vulnerabilities for both Snyk open source, meaning your dependencies, that's not your code that you're relying upon to run your application. And if you enable Snyk code as part of your account, it will alert you to those as well. So that's the one thing to keep in mind. Like, especially when I first started, I thought Snyk code might just be on by default with my account. You have to go into the UI. I believe maybe there's other ways to do this as well. Brian and Micah, keep me honest here. But you go into the UI to enable Snyk code, and then once that's turned on, then you'll get that capability of scanning as well.
Snyk code needs to be turned on your account. However, I think for new free accounts, I'm not sure what the defaults currently are. They used to be off by default. Not sure what it is now. I think it's on, but I'm not honestly sure because it also means we can inspect your code, and some people don't want that. So let's figure that out. Let's leave that in between. I think we have a nice little bridge over here. Are the same features available in the JetBrains Snyk plugin? Now I know that we have somebody on board here called Mr. Micah Silverman, who is an IntelliJ user, a heavy IntelliJ user. So maybe he can spin up his IDE and show if we can do pretty much the same in other IDEs. And, well, TLDR.
My answer is no, because it's Java.
That is a great answer. That is a great answer, but I'm not sure if it's true.
I hate to burst your Java hating bubble there, but check this out.
Let me get yours. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, the cool thing about all of this, all language joking aside, at least for a minute, is that, behind the scenes, it's running the Snyk CLI. So in a way, it kind of doesn't matter. All the functionality is there once you have the extension. So in JetBrains, IntelliJ, it's called a plugin. The extension, kind of the same thing. So Snyk is installed here. And this is a little app called the Snyk Chat Goof. This is the one that I was talking about earlier. That's a mix of Java and JavaScript. And the cool thing is that it picks up on it as we would hope and expect. So it it notifies us both about issues in the POM XML and in the package JSON. And also, here's where Snyk Code comes in. So it's telling me that I have this issue in my code, a cross-site scripting issue. That's in my custom code. It shows me the line where it is, kind of like we saw in Visual Studio Code. And I didn't notice, Brian, if it did this in Visual Studio Code as well or not. But since I work more in IntelliJ, I'm kind of used to this. One of the cool things is when it finds an issue in your custom code, it gives you examples from real live open source projects that had that same vulnerability and fixed it. So even if you're not 100% sure of what a cross-site scripting issue is or how you might fix it in Java, it gives you these 3 examples, and these are all public open source repos on GitHub, and it gives you this diff to show you exactly how they address that same issue. So in this case, they use string escape utils escape HTML. I happen to know that's in the Apache Commons project, but I could kind of easily wrap that around this issue up here with user, where I'm passing through an unsanitized value directly to HTML output. And I get 2 other examples. And in this case, they're mostly the same approach, but it's not always the case. There might be different ways that other projects solve that same problem. So that's like a super helpful bit of feedback there to help me with my own research and how to fix this vulnerability that it found. And I haven't seen another tool personally that does it. There's a lot of really great tools out there, like no shade to them, but I just haven't seen another tool that gives you kind of this live sample of other projects that fixed this same issue. But for the rest of the interface, it hopefully looks somewhat familiar because it's very similar to what we saw with Visual Studio Code. And behind the scenes, it's just using the Snyk CLI as well.
Yeah,
I just have to call out -1 vortex that's here on screen. Is Micah perhaps looking for a better theme? I leave that up to you folks to judge it.
Fair.
But I think Micah loves it.
I think to each their own. If Micah enjoys it and that's where Micah feels the most productive working with that theme, then that's the right answer.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think the big difference between what's happening in IntelliJ and in Visual Studio Code is how it is presented to you. Like this same interface that Mike is now showing you, you can also do for the open source part, and you pretty much see the same as Brian showed you in the beginning. Like, what are the packages, what's going on, which one do I need to update, give me some more information about that. That is pretty much the same for both things. I think where the VS Code one stands out currently is the inline feedback with the 2 vulnerabilities. Although I noticed that the IntelliJ one, the new ones, I'm not sure if that is either the upgrade or it's a setting, but in my IntelliJ last time, it also gives the curly lines under things that went wrong in my Java code, which is pretty much also direct feedback. So personally, I love that direct
I might
feedback.
be missing that. Yeah.
I think it's an update that was currently released.
Neat.
And then to answer your question, Micah, yeah, in VS Code we do get so I didn't demonstrate the Snyk Code part of it in VS Code just yet, but we do get similar view and potential example fixes. I'm curious though, with the example fixes, how have you found those results in terms of their relevancy to what, like, you realizing, helping you understand what you should do to fix that vulnerability?
It's a little bit of a mixed bag. I mean, I think it's pretty sophisticated. In this particular case, I happen to know that string utils is part of Apache Commons. If I didn't, I'd have to Google around because you can't just type string escape utils escape HTML and have it work without bringing in um, Apache Commons into the dependencies of the project. So if I just do this, now it's showing me an error. This doesn't exist. And now if I don't know where that lives, I would have to Google around. But I'm pretty confident that, if I were to search this, it would be like the first hit in Google, right? So it's still very useful. And in this particular case, it so happens that all three of the references are very similar. This one actually is the more modern Escape HTML4. I happen to know that. So if you didn't know that, you might wonder, well, should I use Escape HTML or Escape HTML4? So you might have to do a little further research, but it definitely gives a leg up on like, where do I go from here? Like, as a developer, you might be tempted to reinvent the wheel and be like, oh, escaping isn't that hard. I'm just going to write my own thing. But I'd much rather have a reference that I then have to research a little more and use something that's well supported out in the community.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, absolutely. I was curious about that because I feel like, yes, I've gotten mixed results in some of the examples that have popped up in like my own projects. But they're still, again, very good. I've not seen anything like that, and it's something that's being iterated on to improve and provide more specific examples that will be pertinent to the project.
Brian,
Yes.
do you want to show that in VS Code as well?
Sure, I can do that. But it seemed like Micah was about to. Micah, do you need anything to show there?
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right, so we saw that one collapsible view. So here's the Snyk code view. In this case, we have a little bit less vulnerabilities, thankfully. 23. We'll maybe take a look at this first one: index.routes, unsanitized input from an HTTP parameter. Why isn't that loading now? Oops. Maybe try this one. There we go. For some reason, that one wasn't loading, but here we go. So unsanitized input from an HTTP parameter flows where it used to a NoSQL query. This may result in a NoSQL injection vulnerability. So in some cases, it doesn't give me an example. And maybe depending on the situation, maybe we can find one that. Here we go. This one has an example. All right. So this one is endpoint handler file system operation, right? So when you're doing something like that, somebody can kind of hit you with overwhelm you with a bunch of requests to this endpoint once they realize that you're doing file input output operations, right? Which it can be time consuming. It's blocking. So you can be vulnerable to like a denial of service attack as a result of that. So what Snyk code is alerting me to here is that I should put some rate limiting on this endpoint so that somebody can't just keep inundating me with a bunch of requests, right? So in this case, like, I mean, I fortunately am aware of that type of thing, and I think having that context, kind of like what Micah was talking about with the example he showed, is helping give me a leg up. But at least if you're new to this, you start realizing of the potential of this. You weren't thinking about this before, and then you can start diving deeper into these examples. What I've done in the past is like I've even clicked on the repo to get it. It gives you a few lines of code to give you some context on like what to do here. But like I'm looking at this and I'm like, well, my route isn't set up this way. I'm not using a form. I'm not checking tokens or anything like that. It's just a function here that is doing a file system operation. So maybe I look at another example. In this case, and this is one of those ones where I'm like, I don't know that this option is really relevant here because I don't see anything actually showing me rate limiting. But that's where I might go and click on the repo to get more context in that one and understand that better. But this last one is usually the one whenever I see this rate limiting suggestion come up that helps quite a bit. So you use a limiter library and an Express framework, which is pretty common what we use in Node world. You tell it to use this limiter more globally, or you can tie it specifically to a route. And in this case, they're tying it to a static route. So that's a little bit more understandable, and it gives me a little bit better idea as a newbie to this of what I need to do. I need to find what this limiter is. So then I'm going to go check out this repo a bit more of like, how is that library getting pulled in? What library is that was installed to provide that functionality? And therefore, I don't have to write my own limiter to try and solve this problem. They also give you this example, the suggestions here. Consider using rate limiting middleware such as Express Limit, which is another one out there. There you go.
We're almost at the top of the hour, but I want to end with this final question is pretty much a question on how we should handle vulnerabilities in general. When it comes to these vulnerabilities, what are the best practices? Is it to eliminate all vulnerabilities or to focus on just the critical and high ones? Who wants to comment on this?
I can.
Go for it.
So in my personal opinion, I would say, you know, depending on your situation, right? If you're working with a team, you know, at a company, or you're working solo, that helps sway your decisions. And the reason I say that is because if you're on your own, you know, maybe you have limited amount of time, you can focus on these things, but the same thing could happen with the team. Anyway, I digress. So knowing that context, you as a team have to decide how much of your, you know, depending on your workflow, right? Maybe you're working in iterations and you have certain time allotted to work on fixing security issues and adding new features, fixing just general bugs, right? So you have to decide on what you're capable of doing that. And then within that time frame, which of these vulnerabilities can you address within that time frame? Definitely what you're suggesting there, Gregorian, is like start off with the most, you know, vulnerable ones, the highest priority ones in the sense of the severity levels, right? Critical, high, medium, low, and work your way down. And that's kind of how I would approach it. So figure out how much time you can dedicate to addressing these things, and then work your way down the severity levels as best you can. Micah,
I would also add that there's like a cross section of, you know, low hanging fruit and worst vulnerabilities. And so if it's a critical that's you know, a patch version bump in your configuration, that will almost certainly not cause, you know, a breaking change because it's just a patch version. That's like an easy decision, like definitely update that one. And most of the time Snyk will give you the feedback that you need to say that that, you know, this can be automatically upgraded, or this might require some other care. And one of the things that's not necessarily like immediately apparent is that Snyk doesn't necessarily advise you to upgrade to the latest version. The advice is more about the closest version to the one that you've selected that fixes the vulnerability that was found. And that's not always, you know, totally clear. It's kind of a subtle difference, and it's because of avoiding things like breaking changes.
Yeah, and actually going back to our discussion earlier, right? With knowing whether or not you're truly impacted by that vulnerability too is something to research and understand better when you're alerted to these things, to help you prioritize, right? Because maybe a critical vulnerability that's found is not really something that is impacting you. Now, I would argue though it's still important to address, because, you know, what if you know, unknowingly a new developer comes to the team, whether they're experienced or not, starts using that functionality in that library that has the critical vulnerability all of a sudden, right? You're still relying on that version that has the vulnerability in it. You could potentially find yourself vulnerable directly to it. So it's still worth investigating further and potentially addressing, even if you're not currently using like that code path that results in that vulnerability. And then in terms of the, you know, should you address all vulnerabilities, right? I think it's, you know, it's ideal to try to do that, but it's quite difficult in a lot of cases, especially when I've personally found when it comes to when you start introducing containers, there's a lot of images that are, you know, official images that have vulnerabilities in it that, you know, you might rely on, and there isn't a remedy path right now for.
I have to agree with -1 Vortex. He says like severity is not risk. That is absolutely true, because a lower severe, or well, say a medium or a low severity vulnerability can still
Mm.
be an engager to something else. It can be some sort of, like, how do you say, domino effect or something like that. So that is true. However, I know that a lot of companies have that issue of where do I start? And I would start with the ones that are most vulnerable, the ones that you know that hurt your code base. For instance, in your Snyk code, yeah, definitely you can make. I believe that with a great team and a great test set, you can try to minimize the amount, but it also means that we have to keep up with that. if you talk about open source, try to update more often, because if you don't do that and your application is already a couple of years old, and then something happens to that package, you might need to bump that version to a major new release, which breaks all APIs, etc. So I think it's a combination of where you are with your company, how it's facing, is it outward facing or not. Basically, then we're going into the whole threat modeling thing. So the honest answer would be it depends, but start from the top and work your way down to the bottom. That would be my advice in the end.
It depends is always the answer.
That's why I was a consultant for so many years. That makes a lot of answers and other things.
Mhm.
All right, folks. Brian, thank you for your demonstration on Visual Studio Code and how the Snyk plugin works. Micah, thanks for your comments and on your marvelous theme on IntelliJ and how that works. I appreciate this a lot. And all of you folks that were here today, thanks again for being here, for all the questions. And we will be here next month with new user office hours, and that's all around infrastructure as code and how to secure these kind of things. So for now, I want to say thank you. See you later. And well, have a good day, evening, day, morning, depending on where you are. See you next time. Cheers.